Part 3, Section 5 of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Book of Mark. There are but few passages in Mark called prophecies, and but few in Luke and John. Such as there are, I shall examine, and also such other passages as interfere with those cited by Matthew. Mark begins his book by a passage which he puts in the shape of a prophecy. Mark chapter 1, verse 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare the way before thee. Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. The passage in the original is in the first person. Mark makes this passage to be a prophecy of John the Baptist, said by the Church to be a forerunner of Jesus Christ. But if we attend to the verses that follow this expression, as it stands in Malachi, and to the 1st and 5th verses of the next chapter, we shall see that this application of it is erroneous and false. Malachi, having said at the first verse, Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, says at the second verse, But who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. This description can have no reference to the birth of Jesus Christ, and consequently none to John the Baptist. It is a scene of fear and terror that is here described, and the birth of Christ is always spoken of as a time of joy and glad tidings. Malachi, continuing to speak on the same subject, explains in the next chapter what the scene is of which he speaks in the verses above quoted, and who the person is whom he calls the messenger. Behold, says he, chapter 4, verse 1, The day cometh that shall burn like an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day cometh that shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. Verse 5, Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. By what right, or by what imposition or ignorance, Mark has made Elijah into John the Baptist, and Malachi's description of the day of judgment into the birthday of Christ, I leave to the bishop to settle. Mark, in the 2nd and 3rd verses of his chapter, confounds two passages together, taken from different books of the Old Testament. The 2nd verse, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare the way before me, is taken, as I have said before, from Malachi. The 3rd verse, which says, The voice of one crying in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight, is not in Malachi, but in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. Whiston says that both these verses were originally in Isaiah. If so, it is another instance of the disordered state of the Bible, and corroborates what I have said with respect to the name and description of Cyrus being in the book of Isaiah, to which it cannot chronologically belong. The words in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight, are in the present tense, and consequently not predictive. It is one of those rhetorical figures which the Old Testament authors frequently used. That it is merely rhetorical and metaphorical may be seen at the 6th verse. And the voice said, "Cry." And he said, "What shall I cry? All flesh is grass." This is evidently nothing but a figure, for flesh is not grass. Otherwise than as a figure or metaphor, where one thing is put for another. Besides which, the whole passage is too general and declamatory to be applied exclusively to any particular person or purpose. I pass on to the 11th chapter. In this chapter, Mark speaks of Christ riding into Jerusalem upon a colt, but he does not make it the accomplishment of a prophecy, as Matthew has done, for he says nothing about a prophecy. Instead of which, he goes on the other tack, and in order to add new honors to the ass, he makes it to be a miracle, for he says, verse 2, "It was a colt whereon never man sat," signifying thereby that as the ass had not been broken, he consequently was inspired into good manners. For we do not hear that he kicked Jesus Christ off. There is not a word about his kicking in all the 4 evangelists. I pass on from these feats of horsemanship performed upon a jackass to the 15th chapter. At the 24th verse of this chapter, Mark speaks of parting Christ's garments and casting lots upon them. But he applies no prophecy to it, as Matthew does. He rather speaks of it as a thing then in practice with executioners, as it is at this day. At the 28th verse of the same chapter, Mark speaks of Christ being crucified between 2 thieves. That, says he, the scriptures might be fulfilled, which saith, "And he was numbered with his transgressors." The same thing might be said of the thieves. This expression is in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 12. Grotius applies it to Jeremiah. But the case has happened so often in the world where innocent men have been numbered with transgressors, and is still continually happening, that it is absurdity to call it a prophecy of any particular person. All those whom the Church calls martyrs were numbered with transgressors. All the honest patriots who fell upon the scaffold in France in the time of Robespierre were numbered with transgressors. And if himself had not fallen, the same case, according to a note in his own handwriting, had befallen me. Yet I suppose the bishop will not allow that Isaiah was prophesying of Thomas Paine. These are all the passages in Mark which have any reference to prophecies. Mark concludes his book by making Jesus to say to his disciples, chapter 16, verse 15, "Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned." Fine popish stuff, this. "And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover." Now the bishop, in order to know if he has all this saving and wonder-working faith, should try those things upon himself. He should take a good dose of arsenic, and, if he please, I will send him a rattlesnake from America. As for myself, as I believe in God, and not at all in Jesus Christ, nor in the books called the Scriptures, the experiment does not concern me. I pass on to the book of Luke. There are no passages in Luke called prophecies, excepting those which relate to the passages I have already examined. Luke speaks of Mary being espoused to Joseph, but he makes no references to the passage in Isaiah, as Matthew does. He speaks also of Jesus riding into Jerusalem upon a colt, but he says nothing about a prophecy. He speaks of John the Baptist, and refers to the passage in Isaiah of which I have already spoken. In the 13th chapter, verse 31, he says, "The same day there came certain of the Pharisees, saying unto him," Jesus, "Get thee out, and depart hence, for Herod will kill thee. And he said unto them, Go ye, and tell that fox, Behold, I cast out devils, and I do cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected." Matthew makes Herod to die whilst Christ was a child in Egypt, and makes Joseph to return with the child on the news of Herod's death, who had sought to kill him. Luke makes Herod to be living and to seek the life of Jesus after Jesus was 30 years of age, for he says, chapter 3, verse 23, "And Jesus began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph." The obscurity in which the historical part of the New Testament is involved with respect to Herod may afford to priests and commentators a plea, which to some may appear plausible, but to none satisfactory, that the Herod of which Matthew speaks and the Herod of which Luke speaks were different persons. Matthew calls Herod a king, and Luke, chapter 3, verse 1, calls Herod tetrarch, that is, governor, of Galilee. But there could be no such person as a King Herod, because the Jews and their country were then under the dominion of the Roman emperors, who governed then by tetrarchs or governors. Luke chapter 2 makes Jesus to be born when Quirinius was governor in Syria, to which government Judea was annexed. And according to this, Jesus was not born in the time of Herod. Luke says nothing about Herod seeking the life of Jesus when he was born, nor of his destroying the children under 2 years old, nor of Joseph fleeing with Jesus into Egypt, nor of his returning from thence. On the contrary, the book of Luke speaks as if the person it calls Christ had never been out of Judea, and that Herod sought his life after he commenced preaching, as is before stated. I have already shown that Luke, in the book called the Acts of the Apostles, which commentators ascribe to Luke, contradicts the account in Matthew with respect to Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. Matthew says that Judas returned the money, and that the high priests bought with it a field to bury strangers in. Luke says that Judas kept the money and bought a field with it for himself. As it is impossible the wisdom of God should err, so it is impossible those books could have been written by divine inspiration. Our belief in God and his unerring wisdom forbids us to believe it. As for myself, I feel religiously happy in the total disbelief of it. There are no other passages called prophecies in Luke than those I have spoken of. I pass on to the book of John. End of Part 3, Section 5. Part 3, Section 6 of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Book of John. John, like Mark and Luke, is not much of a prophecy-monger. He speaks of the ass and the casting lots for Jesus' clothes, and some other trifles, of which I have already spoken. John makes Jesus to say, chapter 5, verse 46, "For had ye believed Moses, ye would have believed me, for he wrote of me." The book of the Acts, in speaking of Jesus, says, chapter 3, verse 22, "For Moses truly said unto the fathers, A prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me, him shall ye hear in all things whatsoever he shall say unto you." This passage is in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. They apply it as a prophecy of Jesus. What impositions! The person spoken of is in Deuteronomy, and also in Numbers, where the same person is spoken of, is in Joshua, the minister of Moses, and his immediate successor, and just such another Robespierrean character as Moses is represented to have been. The case, as related in those books, is as follows. Moses was grown old and near to his end, and in order to prevent confusion after his death, for the Israelites had no settled system of government, it was thought best to nominate a successor to Moses while he was yet living. This was done, as we are told, in the following manner. Numbers chapter 27, verse 12. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Get thee up into this Mount Abarim, and see the land which I have given unto the children of Israel. And when thou hast seen it, thou also shalt be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother is gathered." Verse 15. "And Moses spake unto the Lord, saying, Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, which may go out before them, and which may go in before them, and which may lead them out, and which may bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord be not as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said unto Moses, Take thee Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thine hand upon him, and set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and give him a charge in their sight. And thou shalt put some of thine honor upon him, and that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient." Verse 22. "And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and he took Joshua, and set him before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation. And he laid hands upon him, and gave him charge as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses." I have nothing to do in this place with the truth or the conjuration here practiced, of raising up a successor to Moses like unto himself. The passage sufficiently proves it is Joshua, and that it is an imposition of John to make the case into a prophecy of Jesus. But the prophecy-mongers were so inspired with falsehood that they never speak truth. Note: Newton, Bishop of Bristol in England, published a work in 3 volumes entitled Dissertations on the Prophecies. The work is tediously written and tiresome to read. He strains hard to make every passage into a prophecy that suits his purpose. Among others, he makes this expression of Moses, "The Lord shall raise thee up a prophet like unto me," into a prophecy of Christ, who was not born, according to the Bible chronologies, till 1552 years after the time of Moses, whereas it was an immediate successor to Moses, who was then near his end, that is spoken of in the passage above quoted. This bishop, the better to impose this passage on the world as a prophecy of Christ, has entirely omitted the account in the book of Numbers, which I have given at length word for word, and which shows, beyond the possibility of a doubt, that the person spoken of by Moses is Joshua, and no other person. Newton is but a superficial writer. He takes up things upon hearsay, and inserts them without either examination or reflection, and the more extraordinary and incredible they are, the better he likes them. In speaking of the walls of Babylon, volume the 1st, page 263, he makes, by way of giving credit to what he says, a celebrated traveler, that those walls were made of burnt brick, 10 feet square and 3 feet thick. If Newton had only thought of calculating the weight of such a brick, he would have seen the impossibility of their being used or even made. A brick 10 feet square and 3 feet thick contains 300 cubic feet, and allowing a cubic foot of brick to be only 100 pounds, each of the bishop's brick would weigh 30,000 pounds, and it would take about 30 cartloads of hay, 1 horse carts, to make 1 brick. But this account of the stones used in the building of Solomon's temple, volume 2nd, page 211, far exceeds his bricks of 10 feet square in the walls of Babylon. These are but brickbats compared to them. The stones, says he, employed in the foundation were in magnitude 40 cubits, that is, above 60 feet. A cubit, says he, being somewhat more than 1 foot and a half. A cubit is 1 foot 9 inches. And the superstructure, says this bishop, was worthy of such foundations. There were some stones, says he, of the whitest marble 45 cubits long, 5 cubits high, and 6 cubits broad. These are the dimensions this bishop has given, which in measure of 12 inches to a foot is 78 feet 9 inches long, 10 feet 6 inches broad, and 8 feet 3 inches thick, and contains 7,234 cubic feet. I now go to demonstrate the imposition of this bishop. A cubic foot of water weighs 62 pounds and a half. The specific gravity of marble to water is as 2½ is to 1. The weight, therefore, of a cubic foot of marble is 156 pounds, which, multiplied by 7,234, the number of cubic feet in one of those stones, makes the weight of it to be 1,128,504 pounds, which is 503 tons. Allowing then a horse to draw about half a ton, it will require 1,000 horses to draw one such stone on the ground. How then were they to be lifted into the building by human hands? The bishop may talk of faith removing mountains, but all the faith of all the bishops that ever lived could not remove one of these stones, and their bodily strength given in. This bishop also tells of great guns used by the Turks at the taking of Constantinople, one of which, he says, was drawn by 70 yoke of oxen and by 2,000 men. Volume 3, page 117. The weight of a cannon that carries a ball of 48 pounds, which is the largest cannon that are cast, weighs 8,000 pounds, about 3 tons and a half, and may be drawn by 3 yoke of oxen. Anybody may now calculate what the weight of the bishop's great gun must be, that required 70 yoke of oxen to draw it. This bishop beats Gulliver. When men give up the use of the divine gift of reason in writing on any subject, be it religious or anything else, there are no bounds to their extravagance, no limit to their absurdities. The 3 volumes which this bishop has written on what he calls the prophecies contain above 1,200 pages, and he says in volume 3, page 117, "I have studied brevity." This is as marvelous as the bishop's great gun. End note. I pass on to the last passage in these fables of the evangelists, called a prophecy of Jesus Christ. John, having spoken of Jesus expiring on the cross between 2 thieves, says, chapter 19, verse 32, "Then came the soldiers and brake the legs of the first," meaning one of the thieves, "and of the other which was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus, and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs." Verse 36. "For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled, a bone of him shall not be broken." The passage here referred to is in Exodus, and has no more to do with Jesus than with the ass he rode upon to Jerusalem, nor yet so much if a roasted jackass, like a roasted he-goat, might be eaten at a Jewish Passover. It might be some consolation to an ass to know that though his bones might be picked, they would not be broken. I go to state the case. The book of Exodus, in instituting the Jewish Passover, in which they were to eat a he-lamb or a he-goat, says, chapter 12, verse 5, "Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. He shall take it from the sheep or from the goats." The book, after stating some ceremonies to be used in killing and dressing it, for it was to be roasted, not boiled, says, verse 43, "And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner shall not eat thereof. In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh thereof abroad of the house, neither shalt thou break a bone thereof." We here see that the case as it stands in Exodus is a ceremony and not a prophecy, and totally unconnected with Jesus' bones or any part of him. John, having thus filled up the measure of apostolic fable, concludes his book with something that beats all fable. For he says at the last verse, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, and which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written." This is what in vulgar life is called a thumper, that is, not only a lie, but a lie beyond the line of possibility, besides which it is an absurdity, for if they should be written in the world would contain them. Part 3, Section 7 of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I have now, reader, gone through and examined all the passages which the 4 books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John quote from the Old Testament and call them prophecies of Jesus Christ. When I first set down to this examination, I expected to find cause for some censure, but little did I expect to find them so utterly destitute of truth and of all pretensions to it, as I have shown them to be. The practice which the writers of those books employ is not more falsehood than it is absurd. They state some trifling case of the person they call Jesus Christ, and then cut out a sentence from some passage of the Old Testament, and call it a prophecy of that case. But when the words thus cut out are restored to the place they are taken from, and read with the words before and after them, they give the lie to the New Testament. A short instance or two of this will suffice for the whole. They make Joseph to dream of an angel who informs him that Herod is dead, and tells him to come with the child out of Egypt. They then cut out a sentence from the book of Hosea, "Out of Egypt have I called my son," and apply it as a prophecy in that case. The words, "and called my son out of Egypt," are in the Bible, but what of that? They are only part of a passage, and not a whole passage, and stand immediately connected with other words, which show they refer to the children of Israel coming out of Egypt in the time of Pharaoh, and to the idolatry they committed afterwards. Again, they tell us that when the soldiers came to break the legs of the crucified persons, they found Jesus was already dead, and therefore did not break his. They then, with some alteration of the original, cut out a sentence from Exodus, "A bone of him shall not be broken," and apply it as a prophecy of that case. The words, "Neither shall ye break a bone thereof," for they have altered the text, are in the Bible, but what of that? They are, as in the former case, only part of a passage, and not a whole passage, and when read with the words they are immediately joined to, show it as the bones of a he-lamb or a he-goat, of which the passage speaks. These repeated forgeries and falsifications create a well-founded suspicion that all the cases spoken of concerning the person called Jesus Christ are made cases, on purpose to lug in, and that very clumsily, some broken sentences from the Old Testament and apply them as prophecies of those cases, and that, so far from his being the Son of God, he did not exist even as a man, that he is merely an imaginary or allegorical character, as Apollo, Hercules, Jupiter, and all the deities of antiquity were. There is no history written at the time of Jesus Christ is said to have lived that speaks of the existence of such a person, even as a man. Did we find in any other book pretending to give a system of religion the falsehoods, falsifications, contradictions, and absurdities which are to be met with in almost every page of the Old and New Testament, all the priests of the present day who supposed themselves capable would triumphantly show their skill in criticism and cry it down as a most glaring imposition. But since the books in question belong to their own trade and profession, they, or at least many of them, seek to stifle every inquiry into them, and abuse those who have the honesty and the courage to do it. When a book, as is the case with the Old and New Testament, is ushered into the world under the title of being the Word of God, it ought to be examined with the utmost strictness in order to know if it has a well-founded claim to that title or not, and whether we are or are not imposed upon. For as no poison is so dangerous as that which poisons the physic, so no falsehood is so fatal as that which is made an article of faith. This examination becomes more necessary because when the New Testament was written, I might say invented, the art of printing was not known, and there were no other copies of the Old Testament than written copies. A written copy of that book would cost about as much as 600 common printed Bibles now cost. Consequently, the book was in the hands but of very few persons, and these chiefly of the Church. This gave an opportunity to the writers of the New Testament to make quotations from the Old Testament as they pleased, and call them prophecies, with very little danger of being detected. Besides which, the terrors and inquisitorial fury of the Church, like what they tell us of the flaming sword that turned every way, stood sentry over the New Testament, and time, which brings everything else to light, has served to thicken the darkness that guards it from detection. Were the New Testament now to appear for the first time, every priest of the present day would examine it line by line, and compare the detached sentences it calls prophecies with the whole passages in the Old Testament from whence they are taken. Why then do they not make the same examination at this time as they would make had the New Testament never appeared before? If it be proper and right to make it in one case, it is equally proper and right to do it in the other case. Length of time can make no difference in the right to do it at any time. But instead of doing this, they go on as their predecessors went on before them, to tell the people there are prophecies of Jesus Christ, when the truth is there are none. They tell us that Jesus rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. It is very easy to say so. A great lie is as easily told as a little one. But if he had done so, those would have been the only circumstances respecting him that would have differed from the common lot of man, and consequently the only case that would apply exclusively to him as prophecy would be some passage in the Old Testament that foretold such things of him. But there is not a passage in the Old Testament that speaks of a person who, after being crucified, dead, and buried, should rise from the dead and ascend into heaven. Our prophecy-mongers supply the silence the Old Testament guards upon such things by telling us of passages they call prophecies, and that falsely so, about Joseph's dream, old clothes, broken bones, and such like trifling stuff. In writing upon this as upon every other subject, I speak a language full and intelligible. I deal not in hints and intimations. I have several reasons for this. First, that I may be clearly understood. Secondly, that it may be seen I am in earnest. And thirdly, because it is an affront to truth to treat falsehood with complaisance. I will close this treatise with a subject I have already touched upon in the first part of the Age of Reason. The world has been amused with the term revealed religion, and the generality of priests apply this term to the books called the Old and New Testament. The Mohammedans apply the same term to the Koran. There is no man that believes in revealed religion stronger than I do, but it is not the reveries of the Old and New Testament, nor the words of the Koran, that I dignify with that sacred title. That which is revelation to me exists in something which no human mind can invent. No human hand can counterfeit or alter. The Word of God is the creation we behold, and this Word of God revealeth to man all that is necessary for man to know of his Creator. Do we want to contemplate his power? We see it in the immensity of his creation. Do we want to contemplate his wisdom? We see it in the unchangeable order by which the incomprehensible whole is governed. Do we want to contemplate his munificence? We see it in the abundance with which he fills the earth. Do we want to contemplate his mercy? We see it in his not withholding that abundance, even from the unthankful. Do we want to contemplate his will, so far as it respects man? The goodness he shows to all is a lesson for our conduct to each other. In fine, do we want to know what God is? Search not the book called the Scripture, which any human hand might make, or any impostor invent, but the Scripture called the Creation. When in the first part of the Age of Reason I called the creation the true revelation of God to man, I did not know that any other person had expressed the same idea. But I lately met with the writings of Dr. Conyers Middleton, published in the beginning of the last century, in which he expresses himself in the same manner with respect to the creation as I have done in the Age of Reason. He was principal librarian of the University of Cambridge in England, which furnished him with extensive opportunities of writing, and necessarily required he should be well acquainted with the dead as well as the living languages. he was a man of a strong original mind, had the courage to think for himself, and the honesty to speak his thoughts. He made a journey to Rome, from whence he wrote letters to show that the forms and ceremonies of the Romish Christian Church were taken from the degenerate state of the heathen mythology, as it stood in the later times of the Greeks and Romans. He attacked without ceremony the miracles which the Church pretended to perform, and in one of his treatises he called the creation a revelation. The priests of England of that day, in order to defend their citadel by first defending its outworks, attacked him for attacking the Roman ceremonies, and one of them censures him for calling the creation a revelation. He thus replies to him, "One of them," says he, quote, "appears to be scandalized by the title of revelation, which I have given to that discovery which God made of himself in the visible works of his creation. Yet it is no other than what the wise in all ages have given to it, who consider it as the most authentic and indisputable revelation which God has ever given of himself, from the beginning of the world to this day. It was this by which the first notice of him was revealed to the inhabitants of the earth, and by which alone it has been kept up ever since among the several nations of it. From this the reason of man was enabled to trace out his nature and attributes, and by a gradual deduction of consequences to learn his own nature also, with all the duties belonging to it, which relate either to God or to his fellow creatures. This constitution of things was ordained by God as an universal law or rule of conduct to man, the source of all his knowledge, the test of all truth, by which all subsequent revelations, which are supposed to have been given by God in any other manner, must be tried, and cannot be received as divine any further than as they are found to tally and coincide with this original standard. It was this divine law which I referred to in the passage above recited, meaning the passage on which they had attacked him. Being desirous to excite the reader's attention to it, as it would enable him to judge more freely of the argument I was handling. For by contemplating this law, he would discover the genuine way which God himself has marked out to us for the acquisition of true knowledge, not from the authority or reports of our fellow creatures, but from the information of the facts and material objects which in his providential distribution of worldly things he hath presented to the perpetual observation of our senses. For as it was from these that his existence and nature, the most important articles of all knowledge, were first discovered to man, as that grand discovery furnished new light towards tracing out the rest, and made all the inferior subjects of human knowledge more easily discoverable to us by the same method. I had another view likewise in the same passages, and applicable to the same end, of giving the reader a more enlarged notion of the question in dispute, who, by turning his thoughts to reflect on the works of the Creator, as they are manifested to us in this fabric of the world, could not fail to observe that they are all of them great, noble, and suitable to the majesty of his nature, carrying with them the proofs of their origin, and showing themselves to be the production of an all-wise and almighty being, and by accustoming his mind to these sublime reflections, he will be prepared to determine whether those miraculous interpositions so confidently affirmed to us by the primitive fathers can reasonably be thought to make a part in the grand scheme of the divine administration, or whether it be agreeable that God, who created all things by his will, and can give what turn to them he pleases by the same will, should, for the particular purposes of his government and the services of the Church, descend to the expedient of visions and revelations, granted sometimes to boys for the instruction of the elders, and sometimes to women to settle the fashion and length of their veils, and sometimes to pastors of the church, to enjoin them to ordain one man a lecturer, another a priest, or that he should scatter a profusion of miracles around the stake of a martyr, yet all of them vain and insignificant, and without any sensible effect, either of preserving the life, or easing the sufferings of the saint, or even the mortifying his persecutors, who were always left to enjoy the full triumph of their cruelty, and the poor martyr to expire in a miserable death. When these things, I say, are brought to the original test, and compared with the genuine and indisputable works of the Creator, how minute, how trifling, how contemptible must they be! And how incredible must it be thought, that for the instruction of his church God should employ ministers so precarious, unsatisfactory, and inadequate, as the ecstasies of women and boys, and the visions of uninterested priests, who were derided at the very time by men of sense to whom they were proposed. That this universal law, continues Middleton, meaning the law revealed in the works of the creation, was actually revealed to the heathen world long before the gospel was known, we learn from all the principal sages of antiquity, who made it the capital subject of their studies and writings. Cicero, says Middleton, has given us a short abstract of it in a fragment still remaining from one of his books on government, which, says Middleton, I shall here transcribe in his own words, as they will illustrate my sense also in the passages that appear so dark and dangerous to my antagonist. The true law, it is Cicero who speaks, is right reason conformable to the nature of things, constant, eternal, diffused through all, which calls us to duty by commanding, deters us from sin by forbidding, which never loses its influence with the good, nor ever preserves it with the wicked. This law cannot be overruled by any other, nor abrogated in whole or in part, nor can we be absolved from it either by the Senate or by the people, nor are we to seek any other comment or interpreter of it but itself. Nor can there be one law at Rome and another at Athens, one now and another hereafter. But the same eternal, immutable law comprehends all nations at all times, under one common master and governor of all, God. He is the inventor, propounder, enactor of this law, and whoever will not obey it must first renounce himself and throw off the nature of man, by doing which he will suffer the greatest punishments, though he should escape all the other torments which are commonly believed to be prepared for the wicked. Here ends the quotation from Cicero. Our doctors, continues Middleton, perhaps will look on this as rank deism. But let them call it what they will, I shall ever avow and defend it as the fundamental, essential, and vital part of all true religions. Close quote. Part 3, Section 8 of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I have here given the reader two sublime extracts from men who lived in ages of time far remote from each other, but who thought alike. Cicero lived before the time in which they tell us Christ was born. Middleton may be called a man of our own time, as he lived within the same century with ourselves. In Cicero we see that vast superiority of mind, that sublimity of right reasoning and justice of ideas, which man acquires, not by studying Bibles and Testaments, and the theology of schools built thereon, but by studying the Creator in the immensity and unchangeable order of his creation, and the immutability of his law. There cannot, says Cicero, be one law now, and another hereafter, but the same eternal, immutable law comprehends all nations, at all times, under one common master and governor of all, God. But according to the doctrine of schools which priests have set up, we see one law, called the Old Testament, given in one age of the world, and another law, called the New Testament, given in another age of the world. As all this is contradictory to the eternal, immutable nature and the unerring and unchangeable wisdom of God, we must be compelled to hold this doctrine to be false, and the Old and the New Law, called the Old and the New Testament, to be impositions, fables, and forgeries. In Middleton we see the manly eloquence of an enlarged mind, and the genuine sentiments of a true believer in his Creator. Instead of reposing his faith on books, by whatever name they may be called, whether Old Testaments or New, he fixes the creation as the great original standard by which every other thing called the Word or work of God is to be tried. In this we have an indisputable scale whereby to measure every word or work imputed to him. If the thing so imputed carries not in itself the evidence of the same almightiness of power, of the same unerring truth and wisdom, and the same unchangeable order in all its parts, as are visibly demonstrated to our senses, and comprehensible by our reason, in the magnificent fabric of the universe, that word or that work is not of God. Let then the two books called the Old and New Testament be tried by this rule, and the result will be that the authors of them, whoever they were, will be convicted of forgery. The invariable principles and unchangeable order which regulate the movements of all the parts that compose the universe demonstrate both to our senses and our reason that its Creator is a God of unerring truth. But the Old Testament, beside the numberless, absurd, and bagatelle stories it tells of God, represents him as a God of deceit, a God not to be confided in. Ezekiel makes God to say, chapter 14, verse 9, "And if the prophet be deceived when he hath spoken a thing, I, the Lord, have deceived that prophet." And at the 20th chapter, verse 25, he makes God, in speaking of the children of Israel, to say, "Wherefore I gave them statutes that were not good, and judgments by which they could not live." This, so far from being the word of God, is horrid blasphemy against him. Reader, put thy confidence in thy God, and put no trust in the Bible. The same Old Testament, after telling us that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, makes the same almighty power and eternal wisdom employ itself in giving directions how a priest's garments should be cut, and what sort of stuff they should be made of, and what their offerings should be, gold and silver and brass, and blue and purple and scarlet, and fine linen and goat's hair and rams' skins dyed red, and badger skins, etc. Chapter 25, verse 3. And in one of the pretended prophecies I have just examined, God is made to give directions how they should kill, cook, and eat a he-lamb or a he-goat. And Ezekiel, chapter 4, to fill up the measure of abominable absurdity, makes God to order him to take wheat and barley and beans and lentils and millet and fitches, and make a loaf or a cake thereof, and bake it with human dung, and eat it. But as Ezekiel complained that this mess was too strong for his stomach, the matter was compromised from man's dung to cow dung. Ezekiel chapter 4. Compare all this ribaldry, blasphemously called the Word of God, with the almighty power that created the universe, and whose eternal wisdom directs and governs all its mighty movements, and we shall be at a loss to find a name sufficiently contemptible for it. In the promises which the Old Testament pretends that God made to his people, the same derogatory ideas of him prevail. It makes God to promise to Abraham that his seed should be like the stars in heaven and the sand on the seashore for multitude, and that he would give them the land of Canaan as their inheritance forever. But observe, reader, how the performance of this promise was to begin, and then ask thine own reason, if the wisdom of God, whose power is equal to his will, could, consistently with that power and that wisdom, make such a promise. The performance of the promise was to begin, according to that book, by 400 years of bondage and affliction. Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. And God said unto Abraham, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. This promise then to Abraham, and his seed forever, to inherit the land of Canaan, had it been a fact instead of a fable, was to operate in the commencement of it as a curse upon all the people and their children, and their children's children for 400 years. But the case is, the book of Genesis was written after the the bondage in Egypt had taken place. And in order to get rid of the disgrace of the Lord's chosen people, as they called themselves, being in bondage to the Gentiles, they make God to be the author of it, and annex it as a condition to a pretended promise. As if God, in making that promise, had exceeded his power in performing it, and consequently his wisdom in making it, and was obliged to compromise with them for one half, and with the Egyptians to whom they were to be in bondage, for the other half. Without degrading my own reason by bringing those wretched and contemptible tales into a comparative view with the almighty power and eternal wisdom, which the Creator hath demonstrated to our senses in the creation of the universe, I will confine myself to say that if we compare them with the divine and forcible sentiments of Cicero, the result will be that the human mind has degenerated by believing them. Man, in a state of groveling superstition, from which he has not courage to rise, loses the energy of his mental powers. I will not tire the reader with more observations on the Old Testament. As to the New Testament, if it be brought and tried by that standard, which, as Middleton wisely says, God has revealed to our senses, of his almighty power and wisdom in the creation and government of the visible universe, it will be found equally as false, paltry, and absurd as the old. Without entering in this place into any other argument that the story of Christ is of human invention and not of divine origin, I will confine myself to show that it is derogatory to God by the contrivance of it, because the means it supposes God to use are not adequate to the end to be obtained, and therefore are derogatory to the almightiness of his power and the eternity of his wisdom. The New Testament supposes that God sent his Son upon the earth to make a new covenant with man, which the Church calls the covenant of grace, and to instruct mankind in a new doctrine which it calls faith, meaning thereby not faith in God, for Cicero and all true deists always had and always will have this, but faith in the person called Jesus Christ, and that whoever had not this faith should, to use the words of the New Testament, be damned. Now, if this were a fact, it is consistent with that attribute of God, called his goodness, that no time should be lost in letting poor unfortunate man know it. And as that goodness was united to almighty power, and that power to almighty wisdom, all the means existed in the hand of the Creator to make it known immediately over the whole earth, in a manner suitable to the almightiness of his divine nature, and with evidence that would not leave man in doubt, for it is always incumbent upon us, in all cases, to believe that the Almighty always acts, not by imperfect means as imperfect man acts, but consistently with his almightiness. It is this only that can become the infallible criterion by which we can possibly distinguish the works of God from the works of man. Observe now, reader, how the comparison between this supposed mission of Christ, on the belief or disbelief of which they say man was to be saved or damned, observe, I say, how the comparison between this and the almighty power and wisdom of God demonstrated to our senses in the visible creation goes on. The Old Testament tells us that God created the heavens and the earth and everything therein in 6 days. The term 6 days is ridiculous enough when applied to God, but leaving out that absurdity, it contains the idea of almighty power acting unitedly with almighty wisdom to produce an immense work, that of the creation of the universe and everything therein in a short time. Now, as the eternal salvation of man is of much greater importance than his creation, and as that salvation depends, as the New Testament tells us, on man's knowledge of and belief in the person called Jesus Christ, it necessarily follows from our belief in the goodness and justice of God and our knowledge of his almighty power and wisdom, as demonstrated in the creation, that all this, if true, would be made known to all parts of the world in as little time, at least, as was employed in making the world. To suppose the Almighty would pay greater regard and attention to the creation and organization of inanimate matter than he would to the salvation of innumerable millions of souls, which himself had created, as the image of himself, is to offer an insult to his goodness and his justice. Now observe, reader, how the promulgation of this pretended salvation by a knowledge of and a belief in Jesus Christ went on, compared with the work of creation. In the first place, it took longer time to make the child than to make the world, for 9 months were passed away and totally lost in a state of pregnancy, which is more than 40 times longer time than God employed in making the world, according to the Bible account. Secondly, several years of Christ's life were lost in a state of human infancy. But the universe was in maturity the moment it existed. Thirdly, Christ, as Luke asserts, was 30 years old before he began to preach what they call his mission. Millions of souls died in the meantime without knowing it. Fourthly, it was above 300 years from that time before the book called the New Testament was compiled into a written copy, before which time there was no such book. Fifthly, it was above 1,000 years after that before it could be circulated, because neither Jesus nor his apostles had knowledge of, or were inspired with, the art of printing, and consequently, as the means for making it universally known did not exist, the means were not equal to the end, and therefore it is not the work of God. I will here subjoin the 19th Psalm, which is truly deistical, to show how universally and instantaneously the works of God make themselves known, compared with this pretended salvation by Jesus Christ. Psalm 19th. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the earth. In them hath he set a chamber for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it. And there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Now, had the news of salvation by Jesus Christ been inscribed on the face of the sun and the moon, in characters that all nations would have understood, the whole earth had known it in 24 hours, and all nations would have believed it. Whereas, though it is now almost 2,000 years since, as they tell us, Christ came upon earth, not a 20th part of the people of the earth know anything of it. And among those who do, the wiser part do not believe it. I have now, reader, gone through all the passages called prophecies of Jesus Christ, and shown there is no such thing. I have examined the story told of Jesus Christ, and compared the several circumstances of it with that revelation, which, as Middleton wisely says, God has made to us of his power and wisdom in the structure of the universe, and by which everything ascribed to him is to be tried. The result is that the story of Christ has not one trait, either in its character or in its means employed, that bears the least resemblance to the power and wisdom of God, as demonstrated in the creation of the universe. All the means are human means, slow, uncertain, and inadequate to the accomplishment of the end proposed. And therefore the whole is a fabulous invention, and undeserving of credit. The priests of the present day profess to believe it. They gain their living by it, and they exclaim against something they call infidelity. I will define what it is. He that believes in the story of Christ is an Part 3, Appendix, from The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Appendix. Contradictory Doctrines in the New Testament between Matthew and Mark. In the New Testament, Mark, chapter 16, verse 16, it is said, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned." This is making salvation, or in other words, the happiness of man after this life, to depend entirely on believing, or on what Christians call faith. But the 25th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew makes Jesus Christ to preach a direct contrary doctrine to the Gospel according to Mark, for it makes salvation, or the future happiness of man, to depend entirely on good works. And those good works are not works done to God, for he needs them not, but good works done to man. The passage referred to in Matthew is the account there given of what is called the last day, or the day of judgment, where the whole world is represented to be divided into two parts, the righteous and the unrighteous, metaphorically called the sheep and the goats. To the one part, called the righteous, or the sheep, it says, "Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the beginning of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came to me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee? Or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in? Or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, and in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Here is nothing about believing in Christ, nothing about that phantom of the imagination called faith. The works here spoken of are works of humanity and benevolence, or, in other words, an endeavor to make God's creation happy. Here is nothing about preaching and making long prayers, as if God must be dictated to by man, nor about building churches and meetings, nor hiring priests to pray and preach in them. Here is nothing about predestination, that lust which some men have for damning one another. Here is nothing about baptism, whether by sprinkling or plunging, nor about any of those ceremonies for which the Christian church has been fighting, persecuting, and burning each other ever since the Christian church began. If it is to be asked, why do not priests preach the doctrine contained in this chapter? The answer is easy. They are not fond of practicing it themselves. It does not answer for their trade. They had rather get than give. Charity with them begins and ends at home. Had it been said, Come, ye blessed, ye have been liberal in paying the preachers of the word. Ye have contributed largely towards building churches and meeting houses. There is not a hired priest in Christendom that would have thundered it continually in the ears of his congregation. But as it is altogether on good works done to men, the priests pass it over in silence, and they will abuse me for Part 3, Appendix of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. My private thoughts on a future state. I have said in the first part of The Age of Reason that I hope for happiness after this life. This hope is comfortable to me, and I presume not to go beyond the comfortable idea of hope with respect to a future state. I consider myself in the hands of my Creator, and that he will dispose of me after this life, consistently with his justice and goodness. I leave all these matters to him as my Creator and friend, and I hold it to be presumption in man to make an article of faith as to what the Creator will do with us hereafter. I do not believe, because a man and a woman make a child, that it imposes on the Creator the unavoidable obligation of keeping the being so made in eternal existence hereafter. It is in his power to do so or not to do so, and it is not in our power to decide which he will do. The book called the New Testament, which I hold to be fabulous, and have shown to be false, gives an account in the 25th chapter of Matthew of what is there called the last day, or the day of judgment. The whole world, according to that account, is divided into two parts, the righteous and the unrighteous, figuratively called the sheep and the goats. They are then to receive their sentence. To the one, figuratively called the sheep, it says, "Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." To the other, figuratively called the goats, it says, "Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." Now the case is, the world cannot be thus divided. The moral world, like the physical world, is composed of numerous degrees of character, running imperceptibly one into the other, in such a manner that no fixed point of division can be found in either. That point is nowhere, or is everywhere. The whole world might be divided into two parts numerically, but not as to moral character, and therefore the metaphor of dividing them, as sheep and goats can be divided, whose difference is marked by their external figure, is absurd. All sheep are still sheep. All goats are still goats. It is their physical nature to be so. But one part of the world are not all good alike, nor the other part all wicked alike. There are some exceedingly good, others exceedingly wicked. There is another description of men who cannot be ranked with either the one or the other. They belong neither to the sheep nor the goats. And there is still another description of them, who are so very insignificant both in character and conduct, as not to be worth the trouble of damning or saving, or of raising from the dead. My own opinion is that those whose lives have been spent in doing good and endeavoring to make their fellow mortals happy, for this is the only way in which we can serve God, will be happy hereafter, and that the very wicked will meet with some punishment. But those who are neither good nor bad, or are too insignificant for notice, will be dropped entirely. This is my opinion. It is consistent with my idea of God's justice and with the reason that God has given me, and I gratefully know he has given me a large share of that divine gift. Thomas Paine. End of the third part. End of the